Emily Parker never believed a marriage could start ending with a simple question. It was a quiet Sunday evening in a small Michigan town, the kind of place where neighbors waved and life looked calm from the outside. Emily stood in her kitchen, rinsing a coffee cup, when her husband Daniel spoke from behind her. His voice sounded careful, almost unsure, which made her turn around. "Emily, can I ask you something?" That alone felt strange. After 11 years of marriage, Daniel rarely asked anything that wasn't practical. Bills, schedules, plans. Nothing emotional. "Sure," she said. He hesitated, rubbing his hands together like a man preparing for a difficult meeting. "Could you teach me something?" Emily frowned slightly. Teach him. She had once been a literature teacher before switching to freelance editing. Teaching had always been natural to her. Still, the way Daniel asked felt heavy. "Teach you what?" she asked. Daniel didn't meet her eyes. "How to connect better." The words landed harder than she expected. For years, their life had been calm but distant. No fights, no big drama. Just two people sharing space, meals, and routines. Emily felt a small spark of hope rise in her chest. Maybe this was his way of trying again. "Connect how?" she asked gently. Daniel swallowed. How to talk. How to make someone feel seen. How to be interesting again. Someone. Emily noticed that word but didn't comment. She nodded, choosing hope over fear. "Okay," she said. "We can talk about that." From that moment, Daniel changed. He started asking questions at night, sitting across from her on the couch like a student waiting for a lesson. He wanted to know how to listen without interrupting. How to respond with warmth instead of logic. How to notice emotions instead of facts. Emily answered honestly, pulling from years of quiet frustration she had never fully expressed. She told him that people want presence more than perfection. That being understood matters more than being right. That love fades when attention disappears. Daniel listened closely. He nodded. He thanked her. Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, useful, needed, hopeful. They talked late into the evenings. Sometimes Daniel asked for examples. Sometimes he practiced sentences out loud. Emily helped him soften his tone, choose kinder words, pause before responding. It felt strange but intimate, like they were rebuilding something that had cracked over time. Yet, beneath her hope, something felt off. Daniel didn't ask how to reconnect with her. He never said, "I want us to be better." His questions were careful but distant, like he was preparing for a role somewhere else. Still, Emily pushed the doubt away. Marriage meant trust, and trust meant giving the benefit of the doubt. A few weeks later, she noticed smaller changes. Daniel started dressing differently for work. New shirts, a new watch. He checked his phone more often, keeping it face down on the table. When it buzzed, he smiled just for a second, but long enough for Emily to notice. One evening while they were eating dinner, his phone lit up again. That same quiet smile appeared. "Everything okay?" Emily asked. "Yeah," Daniel said quickly. "Just work." She nodded, but her appetite vanished. That night, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She replayed their conversations in her mind. His questions, his focus, his silence when she talked about them as a couple. A heavy thought settled in her chest. What if she was teaching him how to be better? For someone else? The idea hurt, but it didn't feel impossible. Emily had always been observant. As a teacher, she had learned to read what people didn't say. And Daniel's actions were saying something loud even in their quiet home. Still, she said nothing. She continued helping him, answering his questions, encouraging his growth. Part of her hoped that if he learned to connect, he would eventually turn that connection back toward her. But something inside her already knew the truth. One evening, Daniel asked, "How do you know when someone really understands you?" Emily paused before answering. When they listen without planning their reply. When they remember the small things. When you feel calm instead of anxious after talking to them. Daniel nodded slowly, as if memorizing every word. Emily watched him and felt a sharp ache in her chest. She realized he wasn't looking at her as a husband looks at his wife. He was looking at her as a guide. And guides don't get chosen. They get used to reach somewhere else. Days passed, then weeks. Daniel traveled more for work, mentioning meetings in Toronto. His calls were shorter. His texts were polite but distant. Emily stayed busy with her writing, filling her time with words she could control. Then came the night that confirmed everything. Daniel was in the shower. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. Emily wasn't trying to look, but the screen lit up, bright in the dark room. A message preview appeared. "Talking to you feels easy. I wish we had more time." The sender's name was unfamiliar. Emily's heart dropped. Her hands shook, but she didn't touch the phone. She didn't need to. She already understood. The lessons, the questions, the smiles. It all made sense now. Daniel wasn't trying to save their marriage. He was preparing himself for an emotional connection that had already begun somewhere else. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, feeling a strange calm wash over her. The pain was there, sharp and real, but so was clarity. He had asked her to teach him, and she had, just not for her. When Daniel came out of the bathroom, towel around his shoulders, he saw her face and froze. "What's wrong?" he asked. Emily looked up at him, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Who are you learning all this for, Daniel?" The silence that followed was louder than any confession. And in that silence, Emily knew their life had already changed forever. Emily never expected a quiet Thursday afternoon to turn her world upside down. She was just returning from a short walk by the lake, the cold Michigan air brushing her cheeks, when she noticed Daniel's laptop left open on the dining table. Normally, it would have gone unnoticed. She rarely peeked at his work, but something made her glance at the screen. A message preview flashed across it. "That conversation last night meant a lot to me." Her stomach sank. She didn't know the sender, but the tone felt intimate. Curious and anxious, she read just enough to understand the situation without scrolling too far. The messages weren't graphic or explicit. They didn't mention love or physical desire. Yet every sentence carried the warmth and attention she had spent weeks teaching Daniel to offer. The sender's name was Rachel. Emily didn't recognize it at first, but then the context clicked. Daniel often traveled to Toronto for work. Rachel was likely someone from his office, a colleague he had been interacting with regularly. Emily's hands trembled, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had prepared for disappointment in many forms over the years, but not for the realization that her own guidance had been used for someone else. When Daniel returned home that evening, Emily didn't yell. She didn't cry immediately. She simply waited until he set down his briefcase and took a breath. Then she asked, her voice steady, "Who is Rachel?" Daniel froze, caught off guard. His usual composed demeanor wavered. He opened his mouth, closed it, and finally admitted that Rachel was a colleague he had grown close to during his trips. He assured Emily that nothing physical had happened, that it had only been emotional. He tried to explain that he hadn't meant to hurt her and that he had felt invisible for years, overlooked in their marriage. Emily listened without interrupting. Every word he spoke felt like a puzzle piece, fitting into a picture she hadn't wanted to see. Then she said something that surprised them both. "You didn't ask me to teach you how to love me," she said softly. "You asked me to teach you how to be loved by someone else." Daniel's face went pale. He opened his mouth, looking for a response, but there wasn't one. Emily had said what needed to be said. The weight of the truth hung between them, heavier than any argument or accusation could have been. In the following days, Emily made decisions quietly but decisively. She moved into a small apartment near the lake, the same place she had walked when she needed clarity. It wasn't an act of revenge. It wasn't a dramatic statement. It was a choice to preserve her dignity and regain control over her own life. Daniel attempted to reach out. He called, texted, and even visited her apartment, explaining, apologizing, promising that he would change. He asked her to continue teaching him, to give him another chance. But Emily had learned something essential. Some lessons, once applied elsewhere, cannot be undone. Some connections, once redirected, cannot be reclaimed in the same way. Living alone, Emily rediscovered parts of herself she had long neglected. She began writing again, not just for work, but for herself. Short stories, essays, reflections on life and love. Words became her solace, her way of understanding what had happened. Each sentence reminded her that she could rebuild her world without relying on someone who had sought connection elsewhere. Evenings by the lake became a ritual. The water mirrored the changing sky, and Emily found peace in its rhythm. She would watch the leaves fall, the gentle waves lap at the shore, and she would think about the lessons she had learned about trust, love, and self-respect. It was a quiet healing, gradual but undeniable. Occasionally, Daniel tried again. He would send texts that sounded almost like poetry, trying to rekindle the closeness they once had. But Emily's heart no longer responded to those gestures. She realized that love should not require constant instruction, that it should not depend on teaching someone how to choose you. Real love is mutual, natural, and present in daily choices, not just in learned behaviors. Months passed. Emily felt lighter, though not completely healed. She had accepted that some endings are necessary for new beginnings. She learned that heartbreak could be both painful and instructive, teaching lessons about boundaries, self-worth, and emotional independence. She had been the teacher, the guide, and now she became her own student, learning to navigate life and love on her own terms. The day came when she ran into Daniel at a grocery store. He looked at her with a mixture of regret and longing, but Emily smiled politely, calm and composed. There were no harsh words exchanged, no dramatic confrontation. She had no need for it. The lesson had been internalized. She realized that sometimes closure doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from understanding, acceptance, and choosing oneself over lost illusions. Standing outside, the cool breeze tugging at her hair, Emily felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known in years. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't angry. She was simply aware of her strength. She had given Daniel guidance, and he had chosen another path. That path wasn't hers to follow, and she was okay with that. Emily continued her routine, writing and walking, slowly rebuilding her confidence and sense of purpose. She met friends for coffee, laughed more freely, and allowed herself to hope for the future again. She understood now that love and respect start with oneself, and that any relationship must be reciprocal to thrive. Reflecting on everything, Emily realized that Daniel's request had been a turning point, not in the way she expected, but in the way that mattered most. She had been given the chance to see the truth about her marriage, her partner, and herself. It had hurt deeply, but it had also opened the door to personal growth and emotional clarity. The lake became a symbol of her resilience. Watching the water, she thought about the ripples that spread from small actions, questions asked, lessons given, choices made. Every ripple mattered, and every ripple had brought her to this moment of quiet strength. By winter, Emily had fully settled into her new life. Her apartment felt like home, warm and inviting. She had her routines, her work, and a circle of friends who reminded her of the joys of connection that didn't require instruction. She no longer waited for someone to notice her or teach them how to value her. She was already enough. Daniel's presence in her life became a memory, a lesson in disguise. She didn't erase him from her thoughts entirely, but she no longer allowed him to define her emotions. The love she once invested in him was redirected toward herself, toward her healing and growth. Looking back, Emily understood the painful irony. She had been asked to teach Daniel how to connect, how to communicate, how to love in ways he hadn't known. She had poured her heart into it, not realizing that the very skills she was imparting were being used to build intimacy elsewhere. It was a betrayal not of passion or desire, but of emotional trust. And yet, Emily chose to see it differently. She saw it as a lesson in awareness, in self-respect, in the importance of boundaries. She learned that love cannot be forced, shaped, or guided into existence. It must be freely given and freely received, or it isn't real at all. By the time spring arrived, Emily had emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. The lake shimmered in the sunlight, reflecting a woman who had endured heartbreak but refused to be defined by it. She had been the teacher, the student, and ultimately the one who reclaimed her own story. Daniel's request, though it had begun with hope, had ended as a revelation. Emily had learned that sometimes the greatest lessons come from loss, that heartbreak can be a teacher, and that self-love is the foundation of all meaningful connections. And standing there, watching the water ripple and the world move forward, Emily knew she was ready for whatever came next. She had survived the lesson she never wanted to teach, and in doing so, had discovered a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Some lessons, she realized, aren't meant for others. They're meant for ourselves. And this one had changed everything.